The Romano family operated on a simple principle: the louder you were, the more you mattered. And I, Gianna Romano, had never been loud. My grandmother, Rosa Romano, was a force of nature. She'd immigrated from Sicily in 1965 with her husband Carlo, settling in Providence, Rhode Island. They'd started with nothing. Carlo worked construction while Grandma Rosa cleaned houses. By the time I was born, they'd built something remarkable: a portfolio of 12 rental properties scattered across Federal Hill and the surrounding neighborhoods. Modest triple-deckers mostly. Working-class buildings with good bones. Nothing fancy, but solid investments that generated steady income. By 2015, the portfolio was worth approximately $3.2 million and bringing in $22,000 a month in rent. Grandpa Carlo passed away when I was 8. After that, Grandma Rosa ran everything herself. She collected rent, handled maintenance, dealt with difficult tenants. At 75 years old, she was sharper and tougher than people half her age. The family assumed the properties would be divided equally among her 3 children: my father Vincent, my uncle Marco, and my aunt Francesca. And through them, eventually to us grandchildren. My sister Daniela certainly assumed that. She was the golden child of the family, beautiful, outgoing, married to a successful contractor. She had 2 kids, a house in Cranston, and the kind of life that made Italian grandmothers beam with pride. Then there was my cousin Tony, Uncle Marco's son. He worked in finance, drove a BMW, talked constantly about investment opportunities and leveraging assets. My cousin Maria, Aunt Francesca's daughter, had married a doctor. She lived in a sprawling colonial in Barrington and posted constantly on Facebook about her blessed life. And then there was me, 28 years old, unmarried, working as a high school English teacher, making $51,000 a year. Living in a small apartment in Providence. Driving a 9-year-old Honda Fit. The quiet, unremarkable granddaughter who never caused trouble and never stood out. At family gatherings, I'd sit at the far end of the table while Daniela, Tony, and Maria held court. They'd talk about their renovations, their vacations, their achievements. The adults would nod proudly, asking questions, celebrating their successes. When someone remembered to ask me about work, it was always with a slightly pitying tone. Still teaching? That's nice. Doesn't pay much though, does it? I learned early to be invisible. It was easier than constantly being compared to my more successful cousins and found wanting. But Grandma Rosa saw me differently. While everyone else orbited around the louder, flashier grandchildren, Grandma noticed the quiet one who actually showed up. I'd visit her every Sunday after church, not because I wanted something, but because I loved her. We'd sit in her kitchen drinking espresso so strong it could wake the dead, and she'd tell me stories about Sicily, about building a life in America, about surviving and thriving through sheer determination. When I was in college, struggling with tuition and working 2 part-time jobs, Grandma quietly helped. Not loans, gifts. Education is the one thing nobody can take from you, she'd say in her thick accent, pressing cash into my hand. When I graduated and got my teaching job, she was the one who helped me with the security deposit on my first apartment. Don't tell the others, she'd say. They don't need to know everything. As Grandma got older, I was the one who started helping her with the rental properties. First, just accompanying her to collect rent, then handling minor repairs, then managing tenant communications. By 2016, I was essentially co-managing the entire portfolio while working full-time as a teacher. Daniela visited, maybe once a month. Tony and Maria came by on holidays and birthdays. They'd make a show of it, bringing expensive gifts, taking photos for social media, posting about family time with Nana. But they weren't there for the water heater that burst at 2 a.m. They weren't there for the difficult tenant eviction. They weren't there for the property tax appeals or the insurance claims or the 100 small crises that came with managing 12 rental properties. I was there. Every time. In early 2018, Grandma asked me to meet her at her attorney's office. I thought maybe she needed help understanding some legal paperwork about the properties. Instead, I walked into a meeting that would change everything. Gianna, Grandma said, holding my hand across the conference table, I'm not getting any younger. I need to make sure these properties go to the right person. They should be divided among Dad, Uncle Marco, and Aunt Francesca, I said immediately. That's only fair. Fair? Grandma interrupted, her dark eyes sharp. Let me tell you about fair. Your father thinks these buildings are a retirement plan he can cash out. Your uncle wants to sell them all and invest in some scheme his idiot son keeps talking about. Your aunt thinks they're beneath her now that she's moved to Barrington. She squeezed my hand harder. You're the only one who understands what these buildings really are. They're not just investments. They're homes for working families. They're the legacy your grandfather and I built with our own hands. Her attorney, a serious man named Robert DeLuca who'd worked with Grandma for 20 years, slid documents across the table. I'm transferring all 12 properties to you through an irrevocable trust, Grandma said. It executes immediately. Not when I die now. You'll own them. You'll manage them. You'll protect them. I stared at the papers, my heart racing. Grandma, the family will never forgive this. The family, she said with a slight smile, doesn't need to know. Not yet. The trust transfers ownership privately. County records show the properties belong to the Romano family trust with you as trustee and beneficiary. Let them keep assuming. Let them keep making their plans. When the time comes, they'll learn the truth. But, no buts, she said firmly. I've watched you for years, Tesoro. You show up. You work hard. You care about these buildings and the people who live in them. Your sister sees them as dollar signs. Your cousins see them as assets to flip. You see them as what they are, a responsibility and a gift. Robert explained the legal structure. An irrevocable trust meant exactly that. Once executed, it couldn't be undone, contested, or modified. The properties would transfer immediately, with Grandma retaining a life estate in her own home but everything else moving completely into my control. We signed the papers in March 2018. 12 property deeds transferred. The Romano Family Trust was established with me as sole trustee and beneficiary. Everything was filed with the Providence County Recorder's Office, completely legal and public, if anyone bothered to check. Grandma made me promise not to tell anyone. Watch how they treat you, she said. Watch how they act when they think you're getting nothing. That will show you who they really are. So I watched. And what I saw confirmed everything Grandma had suspected. For the next 5 years, I lived 2 completely different lives. Publicly, I was Gianna Romano, struggling teacher with a small apartment and old car. The family member people felt sorry for at gatherings. The one who'd never really done much with her life. Privately, I owned a $3.2 million real estate portfolio generating $22,000 in monthly rental income. That's $264,000 a year in gross rental income. After expenses, property taxes, insurance, maintenance, repairs, utilities for vacant units, I was netting approximately $165,000 annually. I could have quit teaching. I could have bought a luxury car and a big house and rubbed it in everyone's faces. Instead, I kept teaching because I loved it. I kept my small apartment because it was enough. I kept my old car because it ran fine. And I reinvested every penny of the rental income back into the properties. I renovated them one by one. New kitchens, updated bathrooms, fresh paint, modern appliances. I didn't just slap lipstick on them. I did quality work that would last. The kind of renovations Grandpa Carlo would have approved of. I raised rents gradually to market rates but fairly. I was a good landlord, responsive, reasonable, tough when necessary but never cruel. My tenant retention rate was over 80%, which in the rental business is extraordinary. And I learned. I studied property management, real estate investment, landlord-tenant law. I took online courses in accounting and finance. I became an expert in something none of my loud, flashy cousins could understand, the quiet, patient work of building real wealth. By 2023, the portfolio value had grown to $4.1 million. The monthly rental income was $26,000. I'd paid off 2 of the properties entirely, increasing my monthly net income to $195,000 annually. But to my family, I was still just poor Gianna the teacher. Daniela would show me photos of her kitchen renovation, $85,000, all financed through debt she couldn't really afford. You should really try to get a better job, she'd say sympathetically. Teaching is noble, but it doesn't pay the bills. Tony would talk about his stock portfolio and crypto investments. You should let me help you invest, he'd offer condescendingly. Even on a teacher's salary, you could build something. I'd smile and nod and say nothing. The breaking point came at Grandma's 80th birthday party in June 2023. The whole family gathered, 40 people crammed into a rented hall, with catered Italian food and a DJ and all the noise and chaos that came with the Romano family. Grandma sat at the head table, looking tired but happy. I'd spent the morning with her, helping her get ready, making sure she had her medications, ensuring she was comfortable. Daniela swept in an hour late with a huge bouquet of flowers and an elaborate photo opportunity. Tony gave a toast about family legacy and honoring our matriarch. Maria posted 17 photos to Instagram before the appetizers arrived. During dinner, I overheard a conversation that made my blood run cold. Uncle Marco was talking to my father and Aunt Francesca at the next table. "Ma's getting older," he said quietly. "We need to start planning the transition of the properties." "Agreed," Dad said. "We should probably meet, just the three of us, and figure out how to divide things fairly." 12 properties 3 ways, Aunt Francesca calculated. For each. We could keep the best ones and sell the others to distribute the cash. "We should probably bring in Tony," Uncle Marco said. "He's got the finance background. He could help us maximize the value." They were planning Grandma's estate. At her birthday party, while she sat 20 feet away. And I wasn't even mentioned. Not as an heir, not as someone who'd been managing the properties for years, not even as a person who might have an opinion. I was invisible. I excused myself to the bathroom and called Robert DeLuca from the parking lot. "They're planning to divide the properties among themselves," I told him. "They're going to announce it soon, I can feel it. And when they do, they're going to discover the truth." "Are you ready for that?" Robert asked. "No," I admitted. "But it doesn't matter. This was always going to happen. Grandma knew it. That's why she did what she did." "What do you want me to do?" "Be ready," I said. "When they make their announcement, I'm going to need you there with all the documentation." Robert was quiet for a moment. "Gianna, this is going to get ugly." "I know," I said. "But Grandma gave me this gift for a reason. I'm not going to apologize for it." 3 weeks after Grandma's birthday, I got a text in the family group chat. "Family meeting, Sunday, August 6th, 2 p.m. at Francesca's house. All adults required to attend. Important discussion about family estate planning." My stomach dropped. This was it. I texted Robert immediately. "It's happening. Can you be there?" He replied, "I'll be in my car outside. Text me when you need me." Sunday arrived hot and humid. I drove to Aunt Francesca's house in Barrington, passing through neighborhoods I could afford to live in but chose not to. Her colonial was beautiful, professionally landscaped, fresh paint, the kind of house that screamed, "We made it." Inside, the family had assembled. Dad, Uncle Marco, Aunt Francesca, Daniela and her husband, Tony, Maria and her doctor husband, even some of the younger cousins who'd recently turned 18. Notably absent, Grandma Rosa. "She's resting," Aunt Francesca said dismissively. "This discussion doesn't concern her." We gathered in the formal living room. Aunt Francesca had printed agendas. Tony had brought a laptop with a PowerPoint presentation. A PowerPoint for dividing up my grandmother's estate while she was still alive. "Thank you all for coming," Uncle Marco began, standing at the front of the room like he was chairing a board meeting. "We're here to discuss the family properties and make some important decisions about their future management and eventual distribution." "Ma's 80 years old," Dad added. "She can't manage 12 properties forever. We need to start planning the transition." Tony opened his laptop. "I've done a comprehensive analysis of the portfolio." He clicked to a slide showing all 12 properties with addresses and estimated values. Current total portfolio value, approximately $4.1 million. Average monthly rental income, $26,000. He'd done his homework. I felt a cold knot forming in my stomach. Here's what I'm proposing, Tony continued, clicking to the next slide. We divide the properties equally among the three siblings, Vincent, Marco, and Francesca, 4 properties each. Within each group, we keep the highest performing properties and sell the others to distribute liquidity. That makes sense, Daniela said immediately. Some people might want cash instead of dealing with tenants. Exactly, Tony agreed. I've already spoken to a commercial real estate broker about valuations and potential buyers.
Wait.
You've already been marketing Grandma's properties? I asked quietly. Everyone turned to look at me, as if they'd forgotten I was there. Not marketing, Tony said with exaggerated patience. Just getting preliminary valuations. It's called due diligence, Gianna. Does Grandma know you're doing this? I asked. Aunt Francesca waved her hand dismissively. Your grandmother is old and tired. She doesn't need to be burdened with these details. We're her children. We know what's best. This is what responsible families do, Uncle Marco added. We plan ahead. We make sure everything is organized and fair. Fair, I repeated softly. Yes, fair, Dad said, a slight edge in his voice. Equal distribution among the 3 siblings, which will eventually pass to you grandchildren. Everyone gets their fair share. Daniela leaned forward, her expression dripping with false sympathy. I know you helped Grandma with some minor property stuff, Gianna. We appreciate that. Maybe we can pay you for your time, like a property manager fee or something. How generous, I said, my voice carefully neutral. We've divided Grandma's 12 rental properties among ourselves, my sister declared, her voice loud and confident. You weren't invited to this discussion. The room murmured agreement. Tony was already clicking to the next slide showing the proposed property divisions. Dad nodded firmly. It's decided. I looked around the room. At my father, who'd barely called me in the past year unless he needed something. At my uncle, who'd never once thanked me for managing properties he assumed he'd inherit. At my aunt in her big house in Barrington, who thought Grandma's working-class triple-deckers were beneath her now. At my sister, who'd visited Grandma maybe 20 times in 5 years, but thought she deserved 4 properties worth over $1 million. At my cousins, already calculating their future wealth in their heads. Not one of them had asked about Grandma's wishes. Not one had considered who'd actually been doing the work. Not one had even pretended to include me in the discussion. I pulled out my phone and smiled. Has anyone checked the county records since 2018? I asked quietly. The room went silent. Confused faces turned toward me. What? Uncle Marco said sharply. I didn't repeat myself. I just sent a text to Robert. Now. 30 seconds later, the doorbell rang. Aunt Francesca stood up, annoyed. Who could that be? We're in the middle of. I walked to the door and opened it myself. Robert DeLuca stood there in a perfectly tailored suit, carrying a leather briefcase that looked expensive and serious. Good afternoon, he said pleasantly. I'm Robert DeLuca, attorney for the Romano Family Trust. I understand there's been a discussion about property distribution. I stepped aside. He walked past me into the living room, where my family sat frozen in various states of confusion and growing apprehension. Robert set his briefcase on the coffee table and opened it with a precise click. Thank you for inviting me to this discussion. I believe there may be some misunderstandings about the ownership and control of the properties in question. Who the hell are you?
Uncle Marco di Mandith.
As I said, I'm the attorney for the Romano Family Trust. I've worked with Rosa Romano for over 20 years on various legal matters, including the establishment of an irrevocable trust in March of 2018. He pulled out a thick folder and opened it. The trust administrator stepped forward with a briefcase. Everyone fell silent. Robert's voice was calm, professional, devastating. In March 2018, Mrs. Rosa Romano executed an irrevocable trust transferring all 12 rental properties to her granddaughter, Gianna Romano. The trust executed immediately, meaning ownership transferred at that time, not upon Mrs. Romano's death. The silence was absolute. Then explosive. That's impossible. Tony shouted, jumping to his feet. Those properties belong to the family. They belong, Robert said calmly, to the Romano Family Trust, administered by and for the benefit of Gianna Romano. He began laying documents on the coffee table like a dealer laying out cards. Here are the 12 property deeds, each showing transfer from Rosa Romano to the Romano Family Trust, dated March 12, 2018. Each deed was properly notarized, witnessed, and filed with the Providence County Recorder's Office. Document after document hit the table. Official county seals. Notary stamps. Transfer dates. That can't be legal, Daniela shrieked. She can't just give away everything without telling us. She absolutely can, Robert said. And did. An irrevocable trust is a legal instrument specifically designed for this purpose. Mrs. Romano had every right to dispose of her property as she saw fit. She was probably senile. Aunt Francesca spat. Gianna manipulated a confused old woman. Robert's expression turned icy. Mrs. Romano was evaluated by 2 independent physicians prior to executing the trust. Both certified her as mentally competent. Any claim of undue influence or diminished capacity would fail immediately in court. He pulled out more documents. Furthermore, here are 5 years of property management records. Tax returns showing Gianna Romano paying all property taxes. Insurance policies in the trust's name. Rental income deposits. Renovation receipts. Maintenance logs. The evidence kept piling up. Undeniable. Overwhelming. Gianna has been the legal owner and active manager of these properties for over 5 years, Robert continued. She's paid over $400,000 in property taxes. She's invested approximately $280,000 in renovations and improvements. She's managed tenant relations, handled evictions, coordinated repairs, and maintained the properties to a higher standard than they've ever been maintained before. Dad's face had gone from red to white. 5 years? You've owned these properties for 5 years and never said anything. Grandma asked me not to, I said quietly. It was the first time I'd spoken since Robert arrived. She wanted to see how the family would treat me when they thought I had nothing. Well, now we know. Daniela screamed, standing up so violently she knocked over her water glass. You're a sneaky, manipulative liar who stole our inheritance. I didn't steal anything, I said, my voice still calm, but with steel underneath. Grandma gave me something I'd actually earned through 5 years of work. Something none of you even noticed I was doing. Work. Tony laughed bitterly. You collected some rent and made a few phone calls. Robert pulled out another document. Actually, let me read from Gianna's property management log. In the past 5 years, she has coordinated 47 renovation projects, handled 23 tenant evictions through proper legal channels, responded to 312 maintenance emergencies including 14 after midnight, negotiated with contractors to save approximately $85,000 in repair costs, and maintained a tenant retention rate of 83%, which is exceptional in the rental property business. He looked up at Tony. How many of those late-night emergency calls did you handle? How many evictions did you process? How many renovation projects did you coordinate? Silence. That's what I thought, Robert said. Uncle Marco found his voice, and it was full of venom. This is elder abuse. You convinced a sick old woman to cut out her own children. Grandma wasn't sick when she signed the trust, I interrupted. She was sharp as ever. And she didn't cut anyone out. She gave her estate to the person who actually showed up. I stood up, tired of sitting while they loomed over me. For 5 years, I've managed these properties. I've collected rent at 6 a.m. from difficult tenants. I've dealt with burst pipes and broken furnaces and bedbugs and noise complaints. I've spent weekends painting apartments and evenings reviewing tenant applications. I looked around the room at all of them. Where were you? Daniela, when was the last time you visited Grandma without it being a holiday or her birthday? Daniela's mouth opened and closed. Tony, how many times did you offer to help with the properties instead of just talking about how you'd invest the money once you inherited them? Tony looked away. Maria, have you ever even been inside one of the rental properties? Do you even know where they all are? Maria stared at the floor. And you three, I said, looking at Dad, Uncle Marco, and Aunt Francesca. You're her children. When's the last time any of you spent real time with her? Not a birthday visit or holiday dinner, but actual time? Sitting with her, listening to her stories, caring about her as a person instead of as someone who owns valuable real estate. Dad's jaw worked, but no sound came out. Grandma knew, I said quietly. She knew exactly what would happen if she left the properties to be divided among you. They'd be sold within a year, liquidated to pay off debts and fund lifestyles. The legacy she and Grandpa built gone. That's not true. Aunt Francesca protested. Really? I pulled out my own folder, one Robert didn't know about. Should I discuss the $67,000 in credit card debt Daniela's carrying? Or Tony's margin calls from his failed stock trades? Or the fact that Maria's husband is being sued for malpractice and they're desperate for cash? The room erupted in chaos. Shouting, accusations, denials. I raised my voice over the noise. I hired a private investigator. I wanted to know exactly what would happen to Grandma's properties if you inherited them. The answer is, they'd be destroyed, sold off, carved up, liquidated to pay your debts and fund your lifestyle inflation. Robert pulled out one final document. There's one more thing we need to discuss. The room quieted at his tone. In 2019, someone accessed Mrs. Romano's bank accounts and withdrew $28,000 over a period of 4 months. Small withdrawals, $2,000 here, $3,000 there, designed to avoid triggering fraud alerts. Everyone went very still. The withdrawals were made by someone with access to Mrs. Romano's PIN and account information. Someone she trusted. Robert slid a bank statement across the table. The money was deposited into an account belonging to Anthony Romano. All eyes turned to Tony.
His face had gone sheet white.
That's not. I was helping Nana with her bills. Tony stammered. She asked me to. Then you'll have receipts, Robert said calmly. Proof that the money went to pay Mrs. Romano's expenses and not into your personal accounts. We'd be happy to see those receipts. The State Attorney General's office would also be interested. Tony's mouth opened and closed like a fish drowning on dry land. You stole from your own grandmother, I said, my voice full of disgust. And you have the audacity to accuse me of manipulation? It was a loan. Tony shouted desperately. I was going to pay it back. With what money? I asked. The inheritance you thought was coming? The room descended into chaos again. Family members shouting at each other. Accusations flying. Years of resentment bubbling to the surface. I turned to Robert. Are we done here? I believe so, he said, closing his briefcase. Unless anyone has legal questions about the trust structure or property ownership? Silence. Hostile, bitter silence. Robert handed business cards to my father, uncle, and aunt. If you have questions or wish to contest the trust, which I advise against, as it will cost you significant legal fees and result in certain failure, you can contact my office during business hours. He turned to me. Shall we? I picked up my purse. At the door, I turned back one last time. My family sat in ruins. Daniela was crying. Tony looked like he might throw up. Uncle Marco was staring at the documents on the table like they might disappear if he glared hard enough. Dad finally found his voice. How could you do this to your own family? I looked at him, really looked at him, and felt nothing but sadness.
You did this to yourselves.
You assumed, you planned, you divided up assets that weren't yours. You excluded me from discussions about properties I'd been managing for 5 years. You treated Grandma like a bank account and me like I was invisible. We're your family, Aunt Francesca shouted. Family, I said quietly, shows up. Family does the work. Family cares about people, not just their assets. You failed at all of that. I walked toward the door, then paused. Grandma wanted me to tell you something. She said, I gave my estate to the granddaughter who earned it. If the others wanted it, they should have been there. And then I left, Robert walking beside me to my car. Behind me, I heard shouting, crying chaos. In front of me, I saw freedom. I drove straight to Grandma's house, her small triple-decker in Federal Hill, where she'd lived for 50 years. She was waiting in her kitchen with 2 cups of espresso already poured. "They know," I said, sitting down across from her. "Good," Grandma said firmly. "It's time they learned the world doesn't revolve around them." We sat in silence for a while, drinking espresso that could wake the dead. "Your father called me," Grandma said finally, crying, begging me to undo the trust. My stomach clenched. "What did you say?" "I told him the trust is irrevocable. I told him I made my choice 5 years ago, and I'd make it again today. I told him if he wanted a relationship with me going forward, he'd better learn to respect my decisions." She reached across the table and took my hand. "You're the only one who saw me as a person, Tesoro. Not an inheritance. Not a retirement plan. A person. That's worth more than 12 buildings." Over the next weeks, the family implosion was spectacular and complete. Tony was investigated for the stolen $28,000. He eventually paid it back to avoid prosecution, but the family shame was permanent. Uncle Marco barely spoke to him anymore. Daniela stopped speaking to me entirely. She blocked me on all social media and told her children I was a bad influence. Dad tried a different approach, guilt. Long voicemails about how disappointed he was, how I destroyed the family. How could I be so selfish? I didn't respond. Aunt Francesca sent a certified letter from her own attorney, threatening to contest the trust. Robert responded with a 10-page legal brief explaining exactly why that would fail and cost her tens of thousands in legal fees. She didn't follow through. What I did do was continue the work. I kept managing the properties with the same care and attention I'd always given them. I completed renovations on 3 more units. I raised rents to market rates, but remained fair with long-term tenants. The portfolio value grew to $4.3 million. Monthly rental income increased to $28,000. And I kept teaching. Because the properties were an inheritance, but teaching was my passion. 3 months after the confrontation, Grandma passed away peacefully in her sleep. I found her in the morning when I came by with groceries. I sat with her for an hour before calling anyone, saying goodbye, thanking her for seeing me when no one else did. At her funeral, the family was civil but cold. We got through it with gritted teeth and forced politeness. But at the cemetery, after everyone else had left, my cousin Lucia approached me. She was 18, one of Uncle Marco's younger daughters. "I just want you to know," she said quietly, "I think Nana made the right choice." I looked at her in surprise. "I saw how you were with her," Lucia continued. "Every Sunday, every holiday. You actually spent time with her. The rest of us just showed up for the photo ops." We talked for a long time at the cemetery. About family, about expectations, about building your own life separate from what everyone expects of you. "Can I visit sometime?" Lucia asked. "Learn about the properties? About what you do?" "Absolutely," I said and meant it. 2 years after Grandma's death, I sat in my new office. I'd converted the first floor of one of the triple-deckers into a small property management company. Romano Property Management now handled not just my 12 properties but properties for 3 other small landlords who'd hired me based on my reputation. The original portfolio was now worth $4.8 million. I'd paid off 4 properties entirely. Monthly rental income, $31,000. Annual net income, approximately $240,000. I'd quit teaching, not because I didn't love it, but because the property management business had grown enough to need my full attention. But I'd started a scholarship fund for Providence public school students pursuing education degrees. Grandma would have approved. Lucia had become my assistant. She was studying real estate at Johnson & Wales and working with me part-time. She was smart, dedicated, and reminded me of myself at that age. The rest of the family had mostly moved on. We were civil at unavoidable family events, weddings, funerals, but the warmth was gone. That was okay. I'd built my own family from people who valued loyalty and work over entitlement and noise. Dad reached out once, about a year after Grandma died. He wanted to talk about reconciliation. We met for coffee. He spent 20 minutes explaining how difficult things had been, how the family had been torn apart, how maybe it was time to move forward. What would moving forward look like? I asked. Well, he said carefully, maybe you could consider sharing some of the rental income with your sister. She's struggling financially, and it would be the generous thing. I stood up. This conversation is over. Gianna, please. Do you know what Grandma told me the day before she died?
I asked.
She said, don't let them make you feel guilty for being rewarded for loyalty. You earned this. I put money on the table for my coffee. I did earn it. Through 5 years of 2 a.m. emergency calls and difficult evictions and endless repairs. Through showing up every Sunday when no one else did. Through seeing Grandma as a person, not a trust fund. I picked up my purse. When you're ready to have a real conversation, one that starts with apologizing for how you treated me for 30 years, call me. Until then, we have nothing to discuss. I walked away.
He didn't call.
Last month, I closed on a 13th property, a beautiful triple-decker that needed work but had great bones. Just like Grandma would have chosen. As I stood in the empty building, planning renovations, I thought about that family meeting 2 years ago. About Robert pulling out those documents. About the moment everyone's faces went from smug certainty to shocked disbelief. I didn't regret it. Not for a second. Because Grandma had taught me the most important lesson. Some people deserve your loyalty, your time, your presence. They earn it through how they treat you, not through biological accident or social expectation. And some people don't. Knowing the difference, and having the courage to honor it, that was the real inheritance. The $4.8 million portfolio